Welcome to Hourglass Cinema, a variety show from victims and villains, and today's attraction is none other than the 2010 James Gunn written and directed superhero film, Super. I'm Captain Nostalgia, and on this episode, I am joined by...
Alan Cram, writer for Victims and Villains and host of You Have to Watch This podcast.
So this was actually your suggestion to do this.
It was, because you're in town and I have two microphones. And I was like, you know what? I want a podcast in the same room with you instead of over Skype.
Yeah.
So this is the first time you and I have been face-to-face to do a podcast. So
This is the second time we've been face-to-face, too.
Yeah.
Which is strange because, like, we lived, like, 15 minutes apart from each other, and then I moved to a different state, and then we became friends and coworkers.
It's actually the third time we've been face-to-face because I did meet you guys at the comic book day at the local comic book shop at the mall. You were doing like giveaways and stuff.
Man, see, I've done so many events. Someone's like, "Yeah, I met you at a convention." I'm just like,
I was the
I'll
one
take
who
your
was
word for
answering every question to the point where you were like, "Okay, we're not coming to you again." That was me.
Oh man, I'm having some flashbacks to that. Yeah, I was like, I gotta give other people a chance here.
Yeah, I'm that guy.
Wow, makes so much sense why we're friends now.
Yes, yes, it does.
But yeah, so I think for us, like both of us, like we've had this like similar journey with this movie. But also, I always appreciate I prefer doing face-to-face podcasts because it just makes the energy on the actual episode like so much more natural rather than like having to take like weird awkward social cues from Skype or Zoom.
Yeah, because especially when you do it with more than two people, like you never know if somebody else is going to talk. It's kind of hard to read when someone else wants to say something over a video call. But face to face, it's a little bit more natural. Like it's an actual conversation. And in the last year, I haven't really done many face-to-face podcasts. I think this is the third one I've done this year. But now I have two microphones, so I'm going to do it as much as I can.
Do it. This is like I'm fortunate enough to like when we do That's High Praise with Micah and me. Like we live like 15 minutes apart, so it's like we're pretty much like the first Monday of every month. Like we've set it up to be like this is the day where we're just gonna come together over food, Nicolas Cage, and podcast.
It's high praise.
That's high praise. I love doing. It's one of the highlights I love now about like doing face-to-face podcasts.
Yeah,
is just like just being able to just kind of like have that, and the setup we have is really good because it's like, all right, we're gonna sit down and watch the movie and then like talk about it like right afterwards. So it's like it's fresh.
Absolutely. So I'm looking forward to coming down and doing That's High Praise with you guys at some point.
Yes, you need to, man.
So,
and we'll even let you pick the movie.
All right.
We only have limitations that like you have to be a movie that we haven't done before.
Okay.
So we don't believe.
I've got a few.
We don't believe in redos.
Neither do I. But I run like on my podcast. We have We have a co-host who joined us 2 years into it. So we just had to revisit Aliens, which I had to watch for the first time like 4 years ago, and then we just did it again this past week because my new co-host hadn't seen it. So
yeah, next month in September the 28th, if you guys are in the Richmond area, we're gonna be doing a convention called Heroes with Con for a Cause, and it is we're lucky enough to do That's High Praise for a live episode. We're gonna be doing Teen Titans Go to the Movies.
Ooh.
Because
it's too late for me to get in on that.
Nicolas Cage, if you want to come down,
I might actually do that.
I mean, I'd have to talk to my wife, but I'm pretty sure you can just stay with us.
Oh, I got my sister. I can.
That's true. That's true. I always forget your sister lives in Richmond.
Yeah, my sister lives in the area, so I might have to do that. We'll talk after the show. Let's talk about Super.
Super. Man, I have such a better appreciation for this movie because when I don't know about your like experience with this movie. I saw it back when Blockbuster was still a thing. It was I rented it and saw it like right as soon as it hit V8, like the DVD. Blu-ray era and really liked it, recommended it to people over the years, and I've only ever seen it the once.
I had only seen it the once back when it came out, and it was in the same time. But I don't think I rented it from Blockbuster. I think this is one I got from the Redbox.
Nice.
But I remember watching it with some friends from college, and we were all like drinking and hanging out and watching this, and we're like, "Damn, this is brutal." It wasn't like we didn't know what to expect for it, but I knew this guy was gonna. The only reason I really got into this because I knew this guy was gonna be doing the next Marvel movie, and I had enjoyed the other superhero movies that came out in 2010 because there were a few that weren't Marvel or DC, and I was like, I want to see this one too because I like Rainn Wilson, and I want to see what this is because if this guy's gonna be doing a Marvel movie, I wanna see what he does.
Yeah, so I remember when Guardians was coming out, like there was a lot of hype around it, and I didn't actually know James Gunn was I didn't put two and two together basically. And also coming into it this time around, I'd never seen The Office. So now I've seen The Office front to back at least 4 times. And so I have a richer appreciation for it, and also I have some trivia for you that is tying into that because The Office is actually how Wilson ended up getting this role.
I was gonna bring that up too.
I did not know that he was James Gunn was actually married to Jenna Fisher at one point.
Yeah.
Which is strange to me. But yeah, it was when they were shooting The Office, and James Gunn was like, "Yeah, I have this movie," and then somehow Rainn Wilson on the set of The Office actually got handed the script for it and really loved it.
I think I read that Jenna Fisher had a copy of the script
Yeah.
at her desk at reception and was like, Rainn, you should check this out. And then he got really into it and was like, I want to do this movie.
Which, can we talk about Rainn Wilson for like just a second? Like,
absolutely.
It breaks my heart that we don't see him do more leading man stuff because he has such a natural energy with this movie. I've never seen The Rocker, which is another film he did.
The Rocker was such a financial flop that I think it scared away a lot of studios from making him a leading man. I like him as a supporting character. Like the things that he's shown up on since The Office have been good. He had a show where he was the leading man that he was kind of like Dr. House, but a detective. Like kind of just an asshole, but
Oh, really?
yeah. I forget what it was called.
Because I remember that they tried to spin off Dwight
The Office
into Shrute Farms was actually
the farm.
a pilot. The farm, yeah, that's what it was called.
Yeah.
And I don't think it made it past pilot.
It didn't. They actually made the pilot a planted pilot, so it was in the show, The Office. Like that episode where he goes to the funeral and you meet all of these different characters. That was the pilot. They reworked it to make it an episode of the final season of The Office.
Oh, no word. No doubt. That's awesome. Did not actually know that.
But he's since The Office, he's shown up on Star Trek Discovery as Harry Mudd, which I really enjoyed.
Okay, that seems fitting for him.
Yeah, I just watched the original Harry Mudd episodes. Like I'm just going back and starting the original Star Trek series now. So I just met Harry Mudd for the first time. I was like, I can see where he went with this. I can see how he based his character off of this older version. He's been Lex Luthor in the DC animated films, which I really like his Lex.
Yeah, I really have enjoyed him doing that particular one. It still kind of blows my mind, but it seems like really fitting for him.
Yeah. The show I was thinking of was called Backstrom.
Okay, I don't know.
Portland Police Bureau's Elite Special Crimes Unit, oh, that's a mouthful, is led by Detective Lieutenant Backstrom, an alcoholic and smoker who is failing in health but takes on cases in special circumstances.
Let's also not forget that he also got his one of his earlier, 2 of his earlier roles, Galaxy Quest.
Yes.
Which I didn't realize, and I showed my wife Galaxy Quest earlier this year, and I was like, "Oh, that's Dwight right there," and she was like, "Oh, that's odd." And then also too, he was in Rob Zombie's debut film, House of a Thousand Corpses. Where,
So I mentioned before that The Rocker. I have IMDb up on my phone. I
sure.
mentioned before The Rocker was a flop. The budget was 15 million. Opening weekend it made 2 million, and then its gross US was $6 million, with a worldwide gross of $8 million. So that it didn't even make back half of its money.
Uh, see, I don't like. I remember like it when it came out, but I don't actually remember it. Like anyone talking about it to me, like the advertisements just kind of made it seem like an alternative, an Elseworlds School of Rock. Like what would happen if like Dewey Finn like never got his life together, like just kept living for the dream.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the cast because I'm trying to figure out where they spent that $15 million. It's in the cast. And there's some like younger people, like people who didn't have their breakouts yet in 2008. But you got Josh Gad, Christina Applegate, Emma Stone, Jeff Garland, Jane Lynch, Jason Sudeikis, Will Arnett, Fred Armisen, Bradley Cooper, um, Aziz Ansari, Dimitri Martin. Like that's a pretty stacked
Yeah,
cast.
yeah. That's like the mid 2000s to like early 2010s of like comedic genius right there.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess like you're trying here. You have someone that's like actually trying to like capitalize on like the success of The Office,
Mm-hmm.
which you look at The Office and like yeah, Steve Carell's career was just taking off around that time.
And I think it was hard. Like Rainn Wilson's not the only one who had flops during The Office.
Sure.
Like John Krasinski had Leatherheads.
Also, he
which-
had 13 Hours too.
13 Hours. That was later in the run of The
Yeah,
Office.
him and Roy did that one though.
Yeah. But like during the peak of The Office, like when Steve Carell was still on, I think it was hard for the men of The Office to get those leading roles when all you see on screen is Dwight or Jim. I think Jenna Fisher had some better luck in that regard with what was it, Blades of Glory she was in with Will Ferrell.
Yeah. I think so.
And Dewey Cox.
Yeah. Walk hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I mean, BJ Novak like has found, he's played little bit parts over here. I
Mhm.
really would have loved to see him kind of manifest into the Spider-Man villain with the Amazing Spider-Man universe
Yeah, because he was Alistair Smythe.
in the second
or
one. Yeah.
William Smythe.
Mhm.
But he was the son, yeah.
But Mindy Kaling, I want to say, is like kind of like the only like actress in that cast that kind of really like kind of carved out her own career because she had the Mindy Project afterwards. She's been in, she's done a lot with Disney. She's on Monsters at Work right
Yeah.
now, and she also did Inside Out,
Yeah, I mean, I think John Krasinski's doing pretty well with himself with
Quiet Place.
Quiet Place and A Quiet Place 2 and
They're,
whatever else they're going to do with The Quiet Place.
Yeah. Like the Quiet Place universe now is
Yeah.
because it's expanding rapidly.
And then Steve Carell became a Silver Fox, so he's doing pretty well.
Yeah, I love to see what Steve Carell has kind of done with it, his career, because he's definitely gone some interesting spots with Vice and Foxcatcher. I don't know if you've seen any of his like dramatic stuff.
I saw Foxcatcher. I haven't seen Vice.
He was
but
incredible
Foxcatcher.
in Vice.
Yeah, because he played Rumsfeld, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's been on my list. I just haven't gotten to it yet. But back to Super.
Yeah, I say all that to say, like, I really like the energy and the charisma that he brings to the screen as Frank. And it's really, like, it's hard for me to watch sometimes some of his, like, stuff, like, now post, like, being through The Office and just being like, oh, like, all I see is Dwight when I see this. But I don't see Dwight in Frank. Because they're so, like, vastly, like, different characters, and he just plays the part extremely well.
Yeah. See, for me, I don't really see Dwight anymore. I see Rainn Wilson. I've listened to many podcasts with him and heard his life story and his philosophy and everything he's doing with Soul Pancake. I think is fascinating to me, and I want to get into it more. I just haven't had the time or remembered about it until just this moment. But like just knowing him as the person, the way he goes about life and his belief structure, is really fascinating to me. And I appreciate everything he does as an actor and as I don't want to say an activist, but as a supporter of mental health.
Sure.
And the spirituality that he embraces, I think, is very interesting to me, and I appreciate him as a human being.
Yeah, his journey over with Soul Pancake over the last couple of years has been just such a blessing to watch, because here you have a guy that literally has made a career for himself. I mean, like, he still makes movies like every now and then. Like, he did Don't Say a Word last year that I really, really want to see. But one of the things that I think that I've enjoyed most about watching his career unfold as an Office fan has been his mental health advocacy with Soul Pancake. And it feels really gratifying that here you have a guy that, like, is being reintroduced to, like, a whole new generation because of Netflix, and is using his celebrity status to really make a difference and talk about mental health advocacy and value and worth, and kind of like traveling the world to like stress that to people.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really interested to see where his career goes from here. And we'll talk about the possibility of Super returning later.
Oh, do you know something I don't?
Well, we'll talk about it.
Okay,
we'll
okay.
We'll get
So
into that at the end.
I guess we should kind of like, before we get into talking about really the nitty gritty and kind of like breaking and deconstructing what Super is. Super, if you guys don't know about it, Super basically is the story of this guy, Frank, who is married to a recovering addict, and she basically backslides into addiction, which propels her to leave her husband for a drug dealer played brilliantly by Kevin Bacon, who was almost played by Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Yeah.
Which I could not see him in this role. But I will talk about Kevin Bacon in just kind of a second, and kind of like where this role lands and kind of like where his career is in this time, because his career is really interesting, and James Gunn, especially, like the two of them and kind of like what ends up happening after this movie. But basically, Rainn Wilson becomes a vigilante to basically take down crime and reconnect with his wife.
Yeah.
And take down this drug empire simultaneously. It is a wildly hilarious, oddly heartfelt, just hour and a half.
And strangely gory.
Yeah.
But I think that comes from James Gunn's history
roots.
with Trauma.
Yeah, Trauma. This is only his second film that he's both written and directed. He had written a couple other films. He'd written The Specials in 2000. He'd written both the Scooby-Doo movies, early 2000s, and then Slither was kind of like his like breakout hit that he'd written and directed. And then since then, he kind of almost has like this Peter Jackson quality to him, to where here you have a guy that like just like thrives on like blood and guts, and excuse me, and then but like somehow like makes like a career and big name for themselves off of like notable fantastical characters.
Yeah.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also Veteran Hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
So, yeah. I guess we're gonna edit all this out. Where's
Yeah.
the first thing you want to talk about?
I want to talk about Frank's mental state after his wife leaves, because watching this, it was interesting to like look into it as from the viewpoint of what is actually going on. Like, is he having a mental break, or is he actually seeing these visions from God? What was your takeaway from it? Because he has this vision where God's finger comes down and
Oh, this is one of the. I totally forgot about this scene.
I did too. So like he envisions that the roof of his house is peeled off, these tentacles come in and wrap him up, and then God reaches in and touches his brain after squirting it with ketchup and like dipping a corn dog in it.
Yeah, it's really, and then like the screen like whites out again, and you see the Holy Avenger, who is
played by Nathan Fillion.
Yeah, is a Nathan Fillion creation. Basically, it is a Christian satire of
Bible Man,
and I'm pretty sure, before I answer your question, I'm pretty sure Devil's Will is played by James Gunn.
It is.
Okay, which is just ironic to me because it kind of almost feels like James Gunn maybe grew up very conservative Christian household. This is kind of like it's like big middle finger.
Well, I think he grew up in the Midwest, so even if it wasn't his household, like he grew up in that area where that was probably very common.
Yeah. So this is interesting for me to like look at media like this, being a believer in Christ, and so I've had not experiences quite this graphic, but I've had experiences very similar.
Okay.
To where like I've heard the audible voice of God, and then like what I heard actually came to pass like a year later.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's actually one of the reasons we like came into Richmond. But I digress, because like this sequence in particularly, it just kind of feels like Gunn is kind of like satirizing a lot of, those people that kind of like do it for it, because I think also around this time is where you have like a lot of like this movie came out in 2010. You have a lot of like 2005 to like 2012, I want to say, like there was like this like sweeping like movement where you had like the prosperity gospel, where it's like God only wants the best for me. And so you have people that are basically saying that like I'm only converting to Christianity because like God wants me to have like a mansion and a BMW, and it's like that's not biblical. But just so I think it kind of almost seems like a satire in a way, where it's like Frank needed this in his mental state, needed like a kind of like almost like a breaking point. And so to me, like I read it as like this is a guy that is just looking for an excuse to like actually live out what he wants.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, I see it a little bit of both. Like I think he knowing what I know about a potential tie-in to this movie in the future, I don't think it's a stretch to say that he is seeing something that he is guiding him down this path. But I also think part of it is he does become mentally unstable, and that's why he does some of the things that he does. without any remorse. Like,
So I would say to a degree that I agree with you, but I think that that's only like in the beginning.
yes, no, definitely in the beginning when he first starts off being the Crimson Bolt. Some of the things he does, some of the
You don't cut the line.
exactly. Just the lack of remorse and restraint that
Yeah.
he doesn't show, which he quickly learns to do because once he gets his sidekick,
Played by Elliot-Page,
Elliot-Page,
Bolty.
Bolty, or Libby, like once he gets the sidekick, he's telling Bolty, you can't kill, like don't kill, like, and I think it's seeing what he was doing through his own eyes, like, oh no, like that, like that's wrong, we can't do that, but not really realizing what he was doing. Like you hit a guy with a wrench that hard in the head and crack him open, he's gonna die.
Yeah.
Like I think in the movie they say he got sent to the ICU, but like I wouldn't want to have to recover from that.
I love it too that that there is a, Frank is it shows Frank's like early like humble beginnings where he is like a victim of like bullying from like a young age. Like there's a scene where like he's in a stairwell and he's crying, like two guys are peeing on him. Like I mean like it does deal with some pretty like dark like turns for bullying here. And I don't know about you, but like watching this, I just kind of kept remembering like you either live long enough to see yourself become the hero, or you die.
You either die the hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Yeah, okay. And that's kind of what we see him do. But like it's interesting where like you think that like you're doing something right, and then like the very person that you're inspiring is actually like a mirror image of you, and then you're like, man, like is that me? Like am I really like that dark? And that's kind of what I really enjoyed about the Bolty Crimson Bolt relationship, is like how it's like juxtaposed to where like she's like psychotically violent,
Yeah,
to where like anytime she hits someone, it's like she just laughs.
she goes balls to the
maniacally.
wall. Like it's very, very violent. It almost reminds me of the mindset of Big Daddy and Hit Girl in the other superhero film from 2010, Kick-Ass.
Which we also did an episode on. We'll link it below.
Yeah. But like you look at that dynamic and they're very
Extreme.
and don't really care about the path of guts that they leave behind them.
Yeah.
They're just like very focused on their mission, and anyone who gets in my way, they're going down. Whereas in this, it's like, don't do this stuff, but we're not going to kill you. We're just going to maim you really bad. You know, the Batman method.
Yeah. And I also too like there's a montage scene in here that I feel like captures it really well, where he's kind of just going through and like stopping a lot of crimes as they're happening.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them, like I mean obviously it's played for laughs, but like he like tackles someone in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And so you kind of see like how much like remorse he has, and you kind of see it at the end of the montage where he's like beating up someone. He's like, you don't steal, you don't molest kids, you don't do drugs, you don't sell drugs.
Yeah.
And then he just kind of continues beating the guy.
Yeah. And I think the wheelchair example is hits the nail on the head. Like he's so focused on the crime happening there, he doesn't really pay any attention to the victim who is now laying there injured. He's just so focused on the criminal that he's blind to the other consequences. Like they're fine afterwards, and you see them later in the news report saying, no, I was being robbed when he attacked this guy. He was saving me. He's the real hero. He's not a criminal. He's a hero. And it's a very gray area of vigilantism. Yeah.
No, it's vigilantism.
Vigilantism. Yeah.
Which it also too is that there's another there's another like film that like I'm like remembering. I just can't remember like the actual name of it. Is like where they talk about like who decides. Oh, it's Man of Steel. In the very beginning of it, where he's like, who decides, what's right? Like who decides which bloodlines are worthy like to live?
Yeah.
You, Zod. And I think that that's the issue with vigilantism is that you see that you might have cops that aren't doing it well. Not to like side with the cops, but like some cities are greatly understaffed and can't take care of the problem. And so I think in that reality, you tend to have the rise of like vigilantism. But again, like who decides is right. And like don't get me wrong, like I'm going to side with him on like obviously the child molester. Like and stuff along those lines, and like the theft.
It's hard to say. It's hard to disagree with everyone he attacks.
Sure.
But I wouldn't say beating them with a wrench is the way to go. That should be the last resort, not the first go to for like somebody cutting in line at a movie theater. I wouldn't take out a wrench. I would just like get in their face and be like, "Yo, what the hell?"
Yeah, exactly. Like there are different levels of degree that like have to come down in order for like true change to like actually happen. Like there's a line in here in the Holy Avenger says it's more important to fight evil in all its forms rather than just to give in. And I think that if we've learned anything over the last year is that you should stand up for the things that you believe in. We saw that all last year with Black Lives Matter and the protests and the rallies, and we've seen that in our own lifetime with Me Too. We've seen that with women's equality rights, and we've also seen that at the same time with what we've been doing as far as like mental health awareness and like making sure that like we're trying to get like the right resources into like the right people, and also that funds and stuff along those lines are getting where they need to be to truly be as effective as they need to be, because like it is really easy to give in. It's really difficult to stand for something that you believe in.
Yeah, and I think even in like the lighter side of things, like the whole Free Britney movement and the release the Snyder Cut, like these are smaller social injustices in the scale of everything. But you look at what happened with Zack Snyder and Warner Brothers, and it's like, no, this is kind of messed up that you messed with this whole film. And then there was this big movement online, like just the size of the movements like that, like to make a change where you get to see the 4-hour cut of Justice League, or the Free Britney movement where you're getting everyone to look at her situation and be like, this is kind of messed up. Like just the way people can bring attention to these issues on the internet, I think is, whether it's something like Me Too or something like Free Britney, like it's very interesting that you can get a lot of attention to a smaller issue. And there's a lot out there that have been brought up in the last few years, that whether it's dealing with something heavy like sexual assault like Me Too, or racism like Black Lives Matter, like it's very easy to have your voice heard.
Yeah, and also with even to kind of bring it back to Frank's own like mental state, and here you have a guy that I think at the same time like just kind of didn't really, was at a place where he didn't really like understand kind of the effects that he was going through, because we see a person's like marriage falling apart in the first act, and then you kind of come to realize that it was like, well, no, Sarah was actually a recovering alcoholic and drug addict, and it's really hard for someone to just kind of give up that lifestyle.
Yeah.
And we talked about this in our Roadrunner episode, where like here you have just a humongous figure like Anthony Bourdain that talks about how he just quit heroin cold turkey. But you look at his lifestyle and how he approached various forms of his life, and he was just he was just replacing one addiction with another. And sure, they weren't maybe as harmful as, let me phrase that, physically as harmful as heroin, but they were still almost mentally damaging to his relationships and kind of the strains. And I
Yeah.
feel like the company you keep with that kind of stuff really matters. And so, Frank didn't really have any company in that way. And so, with Sarah's arc in particular, you have her to where, like, she nearly gets raped by the end of the movie
Yeah.
because of the company that she has chosen to keep. And there's a flashback sequence where it explains kind of like how her and Frank like actually met, and how they made love for the first time. And you kind of learn to see like how their particular impact, like how it impacted Frank, who has been a guy victim of bullying his almost his entire life, and subsequently also like how she found security in someone that she, I would also argue, kind of maybe approached him the same way she approached drugs.
Yeah. And I think the scene in those flashbacks that stood out to me the most was the scene with her sister, where she's like, I can't, like,
Can't support this.
nothing against Frank, but you're rushing into this. Like, you're supposed to wait, like, you're still recovering. You're supposed to wait a year before you make any major life decisions. And personally, in my life, I've had extended family members who have had issues like this, where they make major life decisions after recovering, like while still recovering from things like she is in this film. And it's like, okay, you need to slow down a bit. Like, I completely identified with that situation in that film, and that in the film, and that scene really stuck with me.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Yeah, same. I've also had people that have gone through similar life choices like that and have ended up like actually relapsing because of it. And it's like, it is this cycle, is because you've trained your body to react in a certain way. And so when it's not getting the effects that drugs have on it after so long, like it needs to find that stimulating from somewhere else. And I come back to it very frequently, but a few years ago, Pamela Anderson actually wrote a open letter to the pornography industry, and she talks about how, like, when the habit of porn becomes an addiction, it creates the same brain chemistry reaction that you have with like heroin and cocaine. And I think in a lot of ways, like how we react to something, it can be something as harmful as watching a video, as harmless as watching a video, or as like detrimental as actually, shooting up heroin. And the effects on the body might be very different, but the brain chemistry will probably almost react the same.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's in situations where you have somebody making life choices after a situation like that, like you might not approve, but you gotta hope for the best. And like what stood out to me was when she's like, "Nothing against you, Frank," and he's like, "Meh." Like he understands to a point, I think, but he's so infatuated with Sarah that he knows what he wants.
Well, I mean, sure. Like we're led to believe that like this is the real. It seems like this is the real first person that really cared about him.
Yeah.
Because like we talked about the stairwell scene where like he's getting bullied, but we also didn't talk about the fact that like it also shows his home life, and his home life was like extremely toxic as well, to where like he was beaten. And I mean, granted, it's a spanking, but like that like the fact that the film notes that it's like this is the home life Frank had.
The one thing, just bring it around to be a little bit lighter. The one thing I really identified with was him being ditched at prom, because that happened to me at my senior prom and at my freshman homecoming. So I bookend my high school dances by being ditched by my dates. They weren't like off having sex with the photographer, because there was no photographers, but
Such a weird scene.
yeah.
The fact that like she catches like they make eye contact, she's like, go away,
Yeah.
and like just
And he's
continuing
just
it.
standing there.
Yeah, just watching very
Yeah.
creepily. Yeah, no. So it is interesting to kind of see this film handles comedy really well.
It does.
And it always kind of like hits me in like areas that like I'm not expecting it to, which is something that like I really appreciate about it.
I think that's what James Gunn does best, because you can tell he tells a very good comedic story, but keeps the heart in it. And I think you see that a lot in the Guardians films, because you got Rocket in there, and the way everyone plays off of each other is just very lighthearted. But at the same time, you have the Peter Quill and his mom stuff,
Sure.
where it just keeps you grounded emotionally. And you've got the Gamora and Thanos stuff, and you've got Groot and Rocket with their connections, and then you have Drax being invisible. Well, I guess that's not the Guardians film, that's Infinity War, but still, like James Gunn contributed that. I think he does a great job of balancing story and heart with the comedic elements.
Well, he's always had that the hero dynamic, that like team dynamic too, because you look at Scooby Doo is a great example.
Yeah. I mean, I think the team dynamic in Scooby Doo was pretty much established in the cartoon.
Yeah.
And he just kind of built on that for the live action film. Because what's interesting about the Scooby Doo film is he takes that dynamic that you know from the cartoon and immediately breaks it up. Like they go their separate ways early on in that film, and then he has to bring them back together, which I think was a very interesting thing to do for the first film. I haven't seen the second one. I think I saw the second one once.
Yeah.
But that first one, I think that's very. You talk about him in the team dynamic. I think that's a very interesting thing that he did there, where he took Shaggy, Fred, Velma, and Daphne and split them up and had to bring them back together.
Yeah, I think too, like to a degree, like we also see that like the Guardians movies. I think that like that's the reason why I love Guardians of the Galaxy so much, is just because like he's so great at doing those like team dynamics. Like people always like think I'm weird when I tell them that like that's Guardians 1 is like my favorite Marvel movie.
It's up there for me. Like if I had to watch a Marvel movie right now, it would be Guardians 1.
It's like that perfect balance of like heart, humor, action. Like it looks spectacular, and it's
If
like
somebody-
very big.
If I met somebody who's never seen a Marvel film, and I wanted to introduce them to what Marvel films are, I would show them Guardians, because you have the superhero dynamic, you have this big world that you're exploring, but at the same time you have a talking tree. Like, and it's like, wait, why is there a talking tree? Like, it's a Marvel movie, just go with it.
He also kind of shot himself in the foot, I feel like, with this movie, because Suicide Squad coming up is going to be his fourth superhero movie that he has written and directed in the last 11 years. So like he did this movie, then went off to do Guardians, then did Guardians 2, and then immediately was on to do Guardians 3, and then stuff went down with Disney, and then he came and did the Suicide Squad, and then his next project after this is going to be the Christmas special for Guardians, and then Guardians 3.
Yeah. Well, in between there, he also did some smaller projects too.
Sure.
He did the Belko experiment
and Brightburn.
But
I think he was only like producing on those.
He wrote those, I believe.
Oh.
But he was definitely a producer, and he's very active on any project he does because he was there on set for all of it. I've followed him on social media since 2014, since before Guardians came out, and he's one of the most interesting social media profiles that I've seen. Like, one thing that I've learned from his social media profiles is when he goes through a script and gives notes, he doesn't use red ink. He uses different colors because red is has such a negative vibe to it. He'll like use different colors to like make sure that the criticisms are taken positively and not in a negative light. And I for me, that's just like, I never really thought about that. Like it makes sense. And he also like gives out Play-Doh on set. Like if somebody does a good job, he gives them like a little thing of Play-Doh.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Just need to contact him. Just tell him about our mission, and he'll like send us. Like,
I don't care how old. I don't care how old you are. If someone gives you a little thing of Play-Doh, you're gonna play with it.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's also too like it's really nice like watching this like after like all of like being more familiar with this stuff now, and like kind of seeing like the people that like have like returned to his production. So like
Sean Gunn,
Michael Rooker play Kevin Bacon's goons.
Yeah.
Then you also have Linda Cardinelli, who returned from the Scooby-Doo movies.
Okay, I want to talk about her for a second.
Okay.
Because I feel like there's a whole subplot involving her character in this that got cut. Because she's in one scene and that's it. But the bunnies in the opening intro play a big part. And then like he goes to see the bunnies once, and then at the end of the movie he has bunnies. He has a bunny. So I feel like there's a whole subplot that was deleted with her character because it's bizarre that she's there for that one scene and that's it.
I don't know. I think you're just kind of reading into it. And one of the things that I will say with specifically with that is recently I got the chance to sit down with Natasha Kermani, who's the director on the Shudder movie Lucky. And so she was talking about some of like the ways of like low budget filmmaking is that they just called in friends. They're like, hey, like we need you for a day. Can you come and fill this spot? And this is also a low budget film. I'm almost curious if it was the same exact way. Is where you have like people you've already like established relationships with, and just be like, hey, can you come down for a day and just do this one little line?
I just wonder if there's maybe like one more scene with her in it that's on the cutting room floor, that because I can see at the end of the film him going back in there and sparking a relationship or a friendship with her after everything goes down.
Well, this film is so tight too that you don't really need a lot of those characters. Like I think, and that's one of the reasons I really like Gunn so much as a director and a writer is that he might have stuff that hits the cutting room floor, but he is trying to tell the tightest, best narrative possible.
Yeah, I definitely don't think you need that added relationship in the film. I think having him and Sarah's relationship and him and Libby's relationship really keeps the story focused, which is important. And yeah, it is a very tight script. So I don't need that stuff. Linda Cardellini just was a little bit too big of a name for that pet store clerk for me.
I mean, I can understand that, but I mean, like also too, like I would say that like she's kind of like one of those like cult names.
Yeah.
So kind of almost kind of like Kevin Smith, where like Kevin Smith is like a lot of people know him, but there are people out there that probably have never seen anything by him. And when you look at kind of Linda Cardinelli's profile, like, yeah, she's done Marvel movies, but also at the same time,
she is one of those names. Yeah.
She's a cult that has a cult following with with Freaks and Geeks, and other films.
Dead to Me.
Dead to Me. Yeah. Let's talk about Kevin Bacon real quick.
Yes.
So Kevin Bacon, like we mentioned, kind of came into this super late into production. He joined the cast 1 week before this film started, but this was kind of like much like Gunn in the superhero. This was kind of like his like starting point for like the villain,
Yeah.
the comic book villain, or like superhero villain, whatever you want to call it, because he did this movie. The next year he did X-Men First Class, and then 2014 or 2015 he did R.I.P.D., which is another comic book super villain.
Was he the villain in that?
Yes.
Okay.
So like he just kind of like creates this like trifecta of stuff, and it's really interesting because
He's got the look for a villain.
he does.
Like I could see, not that it's going to happen, but I could see him as Admiral Thrawn in Star Wars. He's got that like the pointed face that just would fit for a villain.
Oh, see, I would want him for another villain, and a lot of people also, including the original actor, talked about it doing it, is having him do Fred Krueger,
Okay.
which I think he would be absolutely perfect for.
Mhm. Kevin Bacon's one of those guys that it's like he has this whole career in the movies, but he also has the Bacon Brothers band, and he does like breakfast commercials.
I forgot about
I've got
those.
a flyer to show you then. But like it's just
And this,
I'm whenever I see Kevin Bacon pop up in something, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. Like I'm not surprised.
this is also a point in his career where he's starting to do more independent work.
Yeah.
Where, like, I mean, I recently saw a TikTok about this. A couple years ago, he did a crime thriller called Cop Car, and it's streaming on Netflix, I believe now. But it's been one of the best reviewed movies in the last few years that he's done. And I feel like anytime that you would see him pop up in one of these like larger studio films, he was always kind of playing the bad guy, but he was also exploring a lot more smaller characters.
Yeah, I think Kevin Bacon's at the point where he can do whatever he wants and not have to worry about money. Like he's just taking things that are creatively fulfilling for him. And you bring up Cop Car, that was the directorial debut of John Watts,
Yes.
who did the new Spider-Man trilogy, and is going to be doing Fantastic Four.
Also did horror super early in his career, but for an Eli Roth movie called Clown. If you guys have never seen it, I highly recommend it. It is one of the most entertainingly messed up movies I've ever seen. It's so good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would love to kind of see him and Nicolas Cage do something together.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
Um,
So, just talking about the effects of this movie, was there any? I don't want to. I guess the best word I can use for this is murder. Was there any attack that Crimson Bolt did that was super memorable to you? Because for me, it's when he's pounding Michael Rooker's head into the fireplace, and then you just see that his skull kind of cracks like a melon, and you just see the different pieces moving. And it's like, oh, like it was disgusting, but I was like, that's kind of clever. Like you never really see anything like that.
Yeah, so obviously, being the co-host of Bisgazing, the horror spinoff we did, I'm the horror guy in this conversation. So I would honestly say that I really enjoyed the scene in particularly where he there's two that come to mind, and it's the first one's gonna obviously be the "you cut in line" guy.
Yeah.
Where he just nails him right in the middle of the head, and like just the way that like his skull comes crashing down is just wonderfully grotesque.
That's the one thing that I remember from this film after the 11 years was how brutal that one was.
Yeah, it's absolutely a brutally memorable scene. But also the second one is it's right before Rooker dies, and it's where Kevin Bacon's exited the screen and he's like, catch this guy. If he gets in here, you're fired. And they swing the body in and blood on a piece of paper. It says behind you, and Sean Gunn just gets it to the head. Like it's such a simple but yet effective scene.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's something that James Gunn does pretty well is like the gore aspect. Like he only uses it to tell the story and move it along. And when you see people like that, like you want these guys to get that for most of the film, like because they are so evil. And then at the same time, when Libby is shot, like it's just as heartbreaking, and then it like leads into everything that you're about to see. Like I don't want to say the end's just like it balances it out. Like his rage after her death brings it to the point where he is going to do all of this to all of his guys.
Yeah, and I think to kind of go off what you're talking about with Gunn, this happens. This film takes place super early in the kind of the golden age now that we call it of superhero films, and I think that you have a lot of like you're 10 years into this where we've already seen what 4 or 5 X-Men movies. We've seen
since this came out.
So from 2000 to 2010. So you had X-Men, you had the trilogy.
Yeah,
and then
Wolverine.
You had Origins.
Origins, yeah.
But you also had
the Spider-Man trilogy.
The first 2 Dark Knight, Batman Begins, Dark Knight.
Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer,
and the second
Daredevil, and then the Blade trilogy.
So like we've already kind of seen and like established that like there are these like tropes, but I think what makes this film, especially now watching this after we were talking about this before we started recording, is like I've been personally experiencing like superhero fatigue because I've just seen so many of them, and there's a lot of like tropes and a lot of things that you come to expect from these films, and I think that Super does a good way at not only satirizing them but also deconstructing them at the same time.
Yeah, because it does a deep dive of what pushes a person to do something like this, and what is their mind state that when they're out fighting crime and just hiding by a dumpster. Like what do they do? Like the realism there is like, yeah, you're not just gonna be sitting on a rooftop waiting for crime to happen. You're not gonna be able to get up there. You're gonna be sitting behind a dumpster waiting for somebody to do something, and you're going to hear something, but it's just a box. Like it's very realistic in that sense. And it does a good job of being an outlier in in the genre. I understand where you're coming from with the superhero fatigue. For me, somehow, every time I hear that Marvel fanfare every week on a Disney Plus show, though, it still gets me pumped. I think it's just a Pavlovian response at this point. Because I like, every time I sit down and watch a Marvel anything, I turn on the sound system, crank it up, and it's like dun 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 dun, and like my chair's shaking, and it's like, yeah, this is gonna be fun.
So 2 things for those of you guys that don't know, Alan is a huge movie score guy.
Yes.
And secondly, you guys can't see this right now, but he's getting the Marvel logo tattooed onto him to profess his love for the MCU.
No, I am not.
No, I mean, I still keep up with them, and like I think I also joked around about this because it's kind of like almost it feels like being in a committed relationship where like I've been with these characters for so long that like I want to know what happens next to them, but also I think the scene that really captures, there's 2 scenes in particular that capture this kind of like sum up what Super is in a nutshell, where him and Libby go out for the first time, and they're just behind the dumpster, and she's like, "This is all it is. Well, this sucks." And then they get back, and she's like, "How come you don't see superheroes in the comics like reading or like like going to sleep or like doing normal people things?" And he's like, "Well, you don't see them." She says you don't see them get bored in the comics, and he says that's because it's what happens between the panels.
Yeah.
And I think that this film definitely takes that realistic approach to where it's like, if vigilantes really did exist in our modern day, how would they wait for a crime? They would hide.
Yeah.
And you see that with him very early on in being the Crimson Bolt, where he's like got a tape recorder, night one, being the Crimson Bolt, and then it goes to night two, and he's like, "There's a sound. Wait, it's a box.
Yeah.
I'll get it later."
One of the most touching things I enjoyed about this film was the ending monologue where he talks about he was meant to save Sarah, and like her, like the way they resolve their relationship in the end of this, where they end up going their separate ways, even though he went through all of this for her, but he accepts it this time because it's not out of the blue. And she moves on to have this loving relationship with another man and have a family, and he's still part of her life, but not in a romantic way. And I think there's something so beautiful about that, about being able to accept losing the one you love, and knowing that they're better for it.
Yeah.
I think there's just something so beautiful about that, and you don't see that much in any film. Like, it's usually like if they break up at the end, it's like it's heartbreaking for the viewer, but in this, it's very easy to accept, and it makes sense for the story.
I would even argue that the entire journey and kind of his like codependency on Sarah, that, you know, we kind of see it explored through like flashbacks, but it's also like she's toxic for him.
Mm-hmm.
And
she's the addict, but he becomes addicted to her.
Yeah. And I mean, you see that very early on, where it's like right before like Jacques actually becomes like the villain in the story. He is just, as he puts it, like some guy who boned another guy's wife.
Yeah.
But there's that desperation that like he's latched onto because she's someone that has authentically loved him. And that love for him kind of became like an escape to be like valued. And it also kind of seems like his character journey throughout is not also like to get her back and to kind of reach that point at the end of it, but it's also at the same time to love him.
Yeah.
The film opens up on him kind of defining two perfect moments.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk about those in just a few minutes, but I want to juxtapose it to his kind of like his character's journey to the point that you're making. And he has two perfect moments that he declares in his life: marrying Sarah for one, for two, helping somebody actually helping the police find the guy who robbed a place.
Yeah.
And like that's all he had ever going for him in his entire life. And then you kind of see the journey that he goes on throughout the duration of the film, and he reaches the end to where he becomes Uncle Frank.
Mm-hmm.
And in being Uncle Frank, he finds new purpose and a new like actually healthy mindset to where he's not codependent on anybody. Like he's learned his own value and his own worth. And I think that that's a character journey that like the viewer themselves like actually needs to take away with.
Yeah, and I also think that by the end of the film, you see all of these other pictures that he's added to the wall that I think are other perfect moments. And I think he realizes maybe they're not perfect moments, but they're moments that are important and perfect in the moment, and appreciating every little thing. And whether it's your nephews or nieces, and just everything, taking stock of everything that is important.
Yeah, and you know, the fact that the film opens up on like these quote perfect moments, and he only has two of them, and then by the end of the film, I mean, he has dozens of them. You know, I think that life is to, you know, kind of go from like Deadpool, like Ryan Reynolds' character talks about how like life is basically like a crap show that eventually pauses like on occasion to gift us these perfect moments,
Yeah.
as Frank calls them in here. And I think that it's those moments that we need to cherish and count on, because life is as good as we make it. And life can be, your entire world could be falling down around you. But hey, like, if I have something to look forward to, like tomorrow, then I'm going to like look forward to that. And that's always been something that we at Victims have strived for. It's like always like challenging people to flip the perspective to where be like, yes, I might be going through depression, but I'm living. I have a
Yeah.
roof over my head. I have friends in my life that actually care about me. I have clothes on my back, food in my stomach. My heart pumps fine. I have full mobility of my limbs. I, just really start to count your blessings and go like deep into depth on why you have value, why you have purpose, and why today is worth living for.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even the quote from Ferris Bueller, "Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around, sometimes you might miss it."
Yeah.
Like just making sure that you take stock in what you do have I think is the message of like this movie to a point. Like life isn't just made up of two perfect moments; it's everything in between those moments too, and appreciating all of that.
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting to watch kind of Frank evolve through the discourse, because especially as the Crimson Bolt, he feels like someone that is acting out of years of repression and not actually being able to articulate how he feels, because he never felt like anybody was listening or nobody like truly appreciated him.
Yeah, it's definitely, you can see the repressed aggression coming from him, and
To a degree, I would even say that some of that stuff comes out with Libby. Libby kind of uses Bolty as an excuse to kind of take all of this like repression and kind of like target it and give it a spot.
yeah, yeah. I think on this on the crazy, on the insane scale, I think Libby is a lot more insane than
Frank.
Frank. I almost said Dwight. Than Frank in this, because she is so trigger happy, and she's so eager to instinctually kill, and he has to be like, no, you. And I think even just the point of her calling him Frank when they break into the guy's house, he's like, you can't stop saying that. Like, you can't use my name. Like, she doesn't really. She's the one who knows about the superhero genre, but she's the one like breaking the first rule of the secret identity, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, that's one of the funniest scenes. And then they get out of there, and she's like, "I'm pretty sure that was the guy."
Yeah.
But no, like her character journey, I think, is really interesting, because here you have a character that is just really examining kind of like, I would even dare say kind of like going through like the motions. Like, just because you work in a job that you're passionate about the subject material doesn't necessarily mean that you are happy in that position.
Yeah.
And that you are happy in a place of mental stability. And I think that Frank showing up to the party in the Crimson Bolt outfit after he gets shot kind of really proves that, she's like, oh, I don't have to go through this dull existence anymore. Like, here is this guy that I can, will give me attention. Like, I mean, she basically, I would even kind of say, like, threw away her life to be with Frank.
Yeah. Because she pushes away all of her friends.
All friends, even the boyfriend.
Yeah.
And
for a guy in a bunch of trash bags.
Yeah. And also ends up having one of the most awkward sex scenes later in the movie.
Yeah. I don't think I thought of this the last time I watched this, but I forgot that the two of them were in Juno together.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, that's weird. And I just moved on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird to kind of see. It's kind of like almost like that Aaron Taylor Johnson and Elizabeth Olsen dynamic from like Age of Ultron into Godzilla.
Yeah, but with a lot less incest.
Yeah.
Uh, anything else you want to talk about with Super? I know you've got notes. I don't.
How much time we at?
We're at 107:30.
No, it's good. So
Okay.
I'll end it. All right. Well, on that note, I think that's gonna wrap it up for us talking about Super. This was a great idea.
I feel bad that we
me
ended
just say
on
that.
incest.
I mean, you wanna talk about something a little
Well,
more
I did
happy?
want to bring up, like, before we wrap this up, I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts going into the Suicide Squad?
So man,
Because that's the whole reason we're doing this, is because
Yeah.
Suicide Squad's coming out this week in the U.S. So what are your thoughts going into it? I know you don't watch trailers, but
I've not watched any trailers aside from the one that they released last year during DC Fandom, which was basically just a quick.
here's who's in the movie.
Yeah. And so I'm really excited for it. Like I haven't said that about a superhero movie in so long. But I think I'm more just excited to see it because it's Gunn
Yeah.
than anything else.
For me, like, I don't do many trailers. I'll do a teaser trailer, and that's about it.
Yeah.
And if I see like TV spots here and there, like, so be it. But I try to avoid those as much as possible. I don't seek them out. From what I've seen about this movie, I am super excited. And partly because this is going to be my return to the theater. Like, I have HBO Max, but I think this is going to get me back into the theaters because I feel like this is going to be one of those experiences that's going to be better with a crowd. And depending on what's going on with this variant, maybe my plans will change in the next week. But right now, I'm planning on going to the theater to see this, and I'm very much excited for that.
Oh, I got my tickets already.
Nice.
Opening night. I'm really excited for this movie. Out of all of the superhero movies that came out this year, this was the one that I was most looking forward to. And I think what really excites me more than anything is not only is it Gunn, but I think Warner Brothers learned their lesson with Snyder Cut and a lot of the stuff that, about like being like too many cooks in the kitchen, where now Gunn's gone on record saying that, like, yeah, they did not help me at all, and it's retaining an R rating, which I really feel like that really hindered the first one.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the issues that DC had back with the original Suicide Squad and the Justice League is that's the Tesseract. I think a lot of those issues have been resolved behind, like, in the studio itself. So I don't think you had those issues so much on Shazam or Birds of Prey. So I'm excited to see where DC goes from here. I still think there are some issues with everything. I still don't know where they're going with all of their stuff, but I'm excited to see this cast perform James Gunn's script, because the cast is so stacked.
So stacked.
I've been saying it for years. I really want to see John Cena in this movie. Like, I'm not a wrestling guy at all, but his comedic chops are fantastic, and I could not wait to see him in this movie and then see his spin-off show.
Yeah, it says a lot to like the quality that they're looking for when it's like, all right, like, this movie isn't even out yet and we're already planning stuff around it. Like this and the Batman. I think it speaks volumes to DC's faith in this property. And I honestly, when you look at kind of like the standouts from like some of like the most memorable and unique DC properties that we've gotten over the last 10 years, they've been R-rated. Snyder Cut and BVS as well. Like, don't get me wrong, like, I've loved Wonder Woman, I've loved Aquaman, but those are kind of like the two strongest ones.
The extended cut of BVS.
Yeah, the Ultimate Edition.
Yeah. And then Joker.
Yeah, Joker too, yes.
But-
So a lot of like the more like adult themes, and when they're not trying to copy Marvel, I feel like is when DC's been at their strongest.
What's going to suck is you still know parents are going to take their kids to see the Suicide Squad because Harley Quinn.
I mean, I'm ready for it regardless. So let us know what you guys think about Super. But Alan, where can people find you? Have to watch this.
People can find me on my podcast. You Have to Watch This podcast. We stream every week on our Twitch channel. We do multiple streams per week. We usually have our live show Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. We're also on all major podcasting platforms and YouTube. You can follow us on Instagram at You Have to Watch This podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at acram4815.
So you guys can find me personally. I'm on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia. I am also on TikTok at Gentleman Ghostface, and you guys can also find us everywhere at Victims and Villains. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, wherever you guys get your major platform podcast, as Alan said. Also, we're on Patreon and Ko-fi, so go to victimsandvillains.net where you guys can sign up for all of that stuff, find more podcasts like this, movie reviews, and most importantly, our mental health resource library. So, have a good one, guys.
Shut up, crime.